gamers, Power Word Heal here, and today we're going to be talking about GDKP again. So we've talked about GDKP a couple times on this channel, and the most recent time it was due to an incident within the community, and then the time before that was kind of more of like a general discussion video where I talk about some of the pros and the cons, and ultimately I lean more on the side of the cons. But I think in both cases I never really ended up getting at exactly why I think GDKP is so bad for the game. So that's why we're making a third video. And, figured third time's a charm. Maybe I'll actually be able to get my point across this time, because I didn't do a great job in the other two videos. So we're going to be recapping a little bit on the first video, because there's some pertinent information in there. And then we're kind of going to move into why I think it's really not great for the game. So the first video, we were basically focusing on some of the claims that were being made around GDKP kind of being a benefit for the player base at large. And we kind of see this kind of resurfacing, especially in light of the fact that there's so much hard resin going around now. And the nature of the argument has changed a little bit. So in the first video, I was more talking about redistribution of gold and how GDKP can be useful for redistribution of gold because so much gold is getting injected into the game via bots and things of that sort, and then people buying gold from the bots, that GDKP is a way to kind of like disperse the gold in a more even manner. And now the nature of that conversation of how it helps the players is a little bit different, because people are talking about how, well, you have all these hard reses now, and if you had GDKP, people wouldn't be hard resing because of GDKP, right? Everybody would want an opportunity to buy the items. First of all, I think that point is not really true. I mean, there was still hard res at the time of GDKP. I've even seen hard res within GDKP runs. That typically tends to be less popular, but I've seen it, so there was always hard res, and you're not really escaping hard res. Obviously, it's a sort of more popular now, but it's more just because there's no alternative. And I do want to make it clear that I don't think that not having hard res in favor of GDKP really helps the casual player, because obviously the items that would be hard res in a hard res run that are now free, quote unquote, in a GDKP run, like open to bid on, are going to be incredibly expensive and are in most cases only going to be able to be afforded by whales who are RMTing, right? So in either way, the casual player doesn't really get much benefit, whether you're talking about the system being GDKP or hard res, right? They're effectively the same for the casual players. I think that's something worth pointing out right off the bat. And then on to the next point that I had talked about previously about GDKP kind of sort of distributing the gold. So the idea there, like I said earlier, is somebody is buying all this gold, they're buying items in the run, and now it's being distributed to 40 people. So instead of one person having that large sum of gold, it's being distributed to 40 people. And the idea is there's less harm that can kind of take place there, right? When more people have the gold, because now there's more buying power between more people on the server. When you only have that one guy on the server, he's got a ton of gold. Right off the bat, a question you should be asking, though, which we did ask in the last video, and is still worth asking to this day, is would people buy the same amount of gold if GDKP wasn't in the game? And people they've gotten really smart about this, they think, and they basically are saying, well, people still buy gold when there's no GDKP in the game. And it's like, well, yeah, nobody ever denied that. Actually, that was never one of the claims that was being made. It's just people were asking if they increase the amount of gold when that's being bought when GDKP is in the game. And I would answer that as it's almost got to be surely yes, because it's just like a very direct incentive to RMT when GDKP is in the game. So surely the answer to that is yes. So yeah, it's kind of like, in some ways you're thinking like, oh, I'm mitigating this problem of all these people buying all this gold, and now it's getting distributed more evenly. But in reality, they probably weren't buying as much gold to do as much harm with to begin with. So just something to keep in mind there. Some food for thought. But, there's still truth about the aspect of it kind of distributing the gold amongst the server, right? And I think this is a point a lot of people like to cling to that support GDKP, but they don't really realize that the reason why they have this view is because they are sort of in the in crowd. Now, what do I mean in the in crowd? Well, typically with these GDKP systems, right, you have these whales that show up with the ideas they want to RMT, right? So they're going to buy a ton of gold, and then they're going to go to these runs, and they're just going to whale in the runs until they get the items they want. Now, there'll usually be like a bunch of these people. There's not a ton, right? But there are a sizable portion, and communities basically spring up around these whales. And the idea is it's to facilitate them, essentially. And obviously to get a kickback off of all the gold that they've bought, right? Because you want to be involved with them because they bought the large amount of gold, so you want your pot to be big in the GDKP. It's all pretty logical. So really how I like to think about these systems is that it's sort of like you're paying for a carry in retail, although it's, it's not quite the same dynamic, but it's very, very similar, right? Where you have the people they have a ton of gold, and usually they still participate in the raid, but if they wanted, they could go kill their character off on the side, and people would still let them in the run as long as they're buying really expensive items. So that's basically what's happening. There's like a carry/buyer dynamic, and like I said, these form around kind of like the whale players typically, and there's not really enough whales in an ecosystem, so like every player that it's looking to raid or do these runs are getting into a run with a whale. And a lot of times there's exclusivity around getting into these runs, whether it be you're in the guild, right, or you have gold to spend, or people just like you, or people in the game. The whole point is that for the casual player that's somewhat disconnected, isn't really deeply embedded into these communities, they're not really benefiting from these large GDKP, scenes, essentially. Like they're basically in a completely different scene or zone. And the moment you step out of that large GDKP scene, a lot of the benefits that people are saying the average or casual player are going to receive from this system, they don't actually benefit from those things. For example, one of the ones that's brought up so often is that soft res runs are really bad runs because, people just leave once they get their item, and sometimes the quality of the run in itself is not even that good because people aren't vetted and all these things, right? But in reality, you can have a really organized, strict soft res system, or you can have a really organized, strict GDKP system, right? You can kind of have both. And right now, when we only have soft res, you see that we have some soft res runs which operate to pretty much the exact same efficiency that the old GDKP runs would have, right? I just did a run the other day for AQ40, where it's like a 40-some minute AQ clear or whatever, 15-minute. I'm not exactly sure what it was, but it was pretty fast for being this early on. In the tier. So it's really not about the fact that like GDKP is just inherently better for producing results, because that's what they always try and say is like, oh, when there's a financial incentive involved, people are looking to play better. And it's like, well, not really, because people need to play well in the SR runs to be in the good SR runs as well, right? So that it's basically equivalent there. If you go to good SR runs, you're going to have a good experience. If you go to good GDKP runs, you're going to have a good experience. If you go to bad SR runs, kind of off-the-cuff ones, you're going to have a bad experience. If you go to bad GDKPs, you're going to have a bad experience. In the case of GDKP, somebody might actually be able to take the item that you quote-unquote won and the gold with them. So I would say that on the whole, there's probably less risk in the SR run. And so basically what I'm trying to say is most players are sort of relegated to having to these like kind of shadier GDKP runs typically. And I think if I have era players that are going to be like coming in this and commenting. I'll say a word on that because I think a lot of era players have a misconception of how the system would work in an actual like kind of like live version of the game, like an anniversary, where you have a lot of players. Right now, obviously, at this current moment, anniversary and era have a closer player base in terms of numbers wise than it was before. But if we take at the start of a fresh, like when this, I think the server had 50 or 60k people on it at one point, right? And era has like most of the time it tops out like 5 to 6k. So the whole point that I'm trying to make here is that when you go to an era run, there's not a ton of them available, right? And the people that are in them tend to be somewhat rich. So the idea is if you're a really new player in era, you're actually kind of getting a good deal. Because to go out in the world and be able to farm like 5 or 6k worth of gold or however much you're going to get from the run, it would take kind of a decent amount of time. You might have to level your professions, etc., things like that. If you can hop into one of these GDKPs, which you actually don't have a terrible chance of joining because people need bodies on era, right? Because there's not as many people looking to run, then you can get in there and you can actually get a decent amount of gold from some of these runs because there's a lot of legacy gold in the system. And you can start, maybe your first run's 4k, maybe your first run's 5k, maybe it's not as much or whatever. But the idea is you can actually start to build up a bit of wealth over time. Now, this isn't really going to be the same with Anniversary, right? You're not going to hop into the runs with the whales with no reputation, not knowing anybody. It's just not the same dynamic. There's no reason for them to bring you if they don't know you or you're not providing them with some benefit, some explicit benefit, right? So that right off the bat is a little bit different. And I think people should be aware of that if they're coming with the era mentality. But I can understand where they're coming from, but it's not quite the same. So my whole kind of argument is just that these systems aren't really benefiting the average player like people are claiming, and they're a bit misled, or they're looking at the system with rose-colored glasses when they're thinking that this is just going to be so good for your average player, And if anything, I think, like I said, not only is there risk involved with these players kind of going to some of these seedier, lesser-known GDKPs for the new players, but also if you don't have the goal to participate in the system at all, which isn't exactly uncommon if you're a new player, you don't really understand the game, you don't know how to make gold, then the fact that there's so many of these runs in the market is actually bad for you as well, right? Because now you can't really find a normal soft res run. Or maybe, the one soft res run you find is like a bunch of hard reses because it's like kind of a binary between people trying to hard res and people trying to run GDKP. So it really doesn't benefit new players at all. And when GDKP is allowed, it really does essentially take over the market. Like pretty much all the runs become GDKP. I remember before GDKP was eliminated in SOD, I was running like 8 to 10 GDKPs a week, and in like phase 1, and most of the runs were GDKPs, and that's why I was running them, right? So yeah, just not necessarily the best system for good players, or for new players, sorry. And I wanted to dispel that rumor first and foremost. But now we'll kind of move on to like the real reason why I think the system is bad. And it really just has to do with the fact that I think it keeps players out of the world. And why do I say that? Well, because GDKP basically contributes to what I would call like WoW's service economy, right? So service economy in WoW would be things like boosting, basically, for classic WoW. So 1 to 60 boosts, right? Mage boosting. And GDKP, or the two main things. There's not really PvP boosts in this version of the game, although maybe you could have them in certain scenarios, right? I feel like a lot of the PvP boosts from rank 1 to rank 14 typically involve IRL money, and we're kind of talking more in-game now, but you get the picture. Those things fall under services. And what I would say would be like production for the WoW economy. Like stuff is basically like going out and farming herbs, right? Going out and getting ore, coming to some place like this, like Tartarus, doing fishing, where you're actually going out, you're getting something, you're putting it into the economy, you're trading with other people, right? And everybody always says with Classic WoW, it's like, oh, this is why Classic WoW is so good, right? It's like, it's all about the world. You have to go out, you have to get resources, you have to interact with people, you have to trade, there can be PvP out there, you meet friends out there because other people are out there doing the same thing as you, you're competing with each other. All these things they list, right? About, this is why I like playing Classic WoW. I don't like playing retail because the world is dead in retail and all this stuff. Then you see them in game and they're not participating in the production part of the economy at all. They're just literally in the service part where they are, just going to a GDKP. They're getting paid out. They now have consumes for 3 to 4 days, 3 to 4 lockouts, and they basically raid log. And I guess you could ask the question, like, well, what is inherently wrong with, people leveraging their quote-unquote skills in the game to make money in the game that way, right? And I would just say, because all of those things are tied to instances, right, it just keeps them out of the world. It keeps them from interacting with other players. It keeps them from really providing anything of value, I would say, for the most part, to other players. Because to be honest, like, let's be real, your run, whatever you're doing, your Molten Core, your Blackwing Lair, that's going to get done regardless of whether you're in it or not in most cases, right? Like, yeah, you might be doing it a little quicker than normal if you're in the run and you're pumping a ton of DPS or something of that sort, but realistically, you're not providing anything to the game's economy or anything like that by doing GDKP. In most cases, you're just siphoning off of the person who bought gold, right? So it's like you basically don't even exist to the system. Now, you might pose the question, well, what if we just, like, destroyed all the gold buying? Like, we banned all the bots, right? We banned all the bots, so now going out into the world and collecting the crumbs, right? Doing the grunt work of collecting the herbs, getting the fish, getting the mining nodes, that's all a little bit more valuable, right? And that's great, right? So there's going to be parity here between going out and doing those tasks and doing GDKP. And that's pretty much never going to be the case because people are going to get a lot of gold, whether it's either still through RMT, because remember, you're not going to eliminate all RMT, right? Or just through brute force methods of, essentially like farming a ton or something like that. They're going to convert those resources into gold. You're going to go into the raid with them. They're going to whale on the item to some degree. It's going to be a lesser whale if they're actually a legit player, right? But again, there's still going to be those RMT players that, don't get caught or whatever. And, you're still better off going to the GDKP than you ever would be coming out here and doing some fishing or whatever. And just to give you some perspective, okay, I'll give you a perspective and then I'll tone it down a little bit. So this is real information, but SOM, there wasn't that many people playing the game, Season of Mastery, especially on Horde side. And Rock Apes was running some of the only GDKPs that were kind of going on at the time. They were basically, honestly, the only instance runs going on at the time. There really wasn't many pugs or anything like that. So this does kind of contribute a bit to why some of the items were so expensive. But anyway, long story short, I would pull in like 5k for a 45-minute Blackwing Lair. That was high-end for sure, but I could pull that. Most of the time, at least over 2k, right? Some 3k, some 4k. Sometimes it would be lower, but usually I could expect to go and get 2.5k, sometimes up to 5k. Now, if I were to go to Ungoro Crater, okay, and I were to farm there, even uncontested, okay, or I come out here and I'm uncontested, I'm probably like netting maybe 100 gold an hour, maybe. Maybe a bit more if I get lucky. If I'm like super uncontested that day, maybe like 150. Kind of depends on the prices on the server. But the disparity there is just mind-boggling, right? And even if you cut down what you'd expect to make in a GDKP by, like a factor of 2 or 5 or 10, you're still coming out on top, like all the time, doing GDKP, and it's pretty much an uncontested thing because you're in an instance, right? It's scripted. You know the encounters. You basically know the outcome. Whereas in the world, there's all these unpredictable things in terms of spawns, other players, PvP, etc., right? So what reason does anybody have to kind of go out into the world, right? There's just no reason. So it basically leaves the bots out in the world to gather resources, and then the players that are new and aren't integrated into this GDKP system, right, where they can benefit from being close to the players who are wealthy and leeching gold off of them, well, they're basically completely screwed, right? They have to go do essentially the grunt work of the bots alongside of them for basically no gold, and it just creates this crazy power disparity between the people who are the most well connected on the server and the people who are the least connected. Now, there's always going to be some disparity, and that's fine because MMOs are built around building those social connections. But we don't need to like artificially inflate that disparity any more than it exists normally, right? Like, there's no reason to allow something like GDKP in the game. It doesn't really serve any purpose. And there'll always be players, like I've already mentioned this, but there'll always be players that RMT and always be players that bypass the system. Even if Blizzard does crack down, they eliminate some of the bots, right? They eliminate some of the gold buying. You're still going to have the guy with like 5 burner accounts, and he's like kind of like washing the gold over time, trading it slowly through, and he's going to these GDKPs and he's whaling. And so now that less people are essentially cheating, even less people can benefit from this system, right? So now, like, we're actually making even more of an elite class, in a way, in the game due to GDKP. And these people are basically contributing nothing to the server, like nothing to they're basically contributing nothing positive to the server. And it doesn't really, I guess, surprise me that people feel this way, that this is fine, because it seems like it's become the norm now a bit, where in my last video where I talked about hard res, there were so many people who are like, oh, well, the reason why people do hard res is because they're taking on like the mental load of setting up the run and stuff like that. And it just makes me laugh, man, because it's like a lot of this stuff when you're setting up pugs is just not really that deep. Like, I've run a bunch of pugs over the years at various times, and it's really more about how connected you are. That's how easy or not it's going to be for you to run a pug. Like, if you're new on the server and you don't know anybody, okay, then it's going to be hard for you to assemble a pug that has a good chance of maybe clearing AQ40 or Nax. But if you're in one of the bigger guilds, or you know people in one of the bigger guilds, right, then it becomes way easier to create this environment where you have like a bunch of players to pull from, right? So it's not really that hard. You kind of create a sign up. You know what generally has to be done. You know that there's a few key roles that you need to really take care of in order to make sure the run is relatively successful, and you do that, right? And it's not really that big of a deal. So it just makes me laugh, though, because it's like people are so concerned about like what they need to extract from the run, and it's like, in reality, I mean, why not extend the olive branch a little bit, right? Like, why isn't it the opposite way? Like, these people, they don't really care that players on the server that are new, like, aren't getting into runs or anything, might be quitting the game because they're getting frustrated. And it's just funny to me because, like, you want the game to be popular, right? You want the game to get bigger. you want more money to be essentially made from the game so that more goes into the development, but we don't want to take any time at all to potentially steward or help new players at all. And we're encouraging systems that like actively dissuade new players from getting deeper into the game, that kind of lock new players out. It just doesn't make any sense to me. You know what I mean? It's kind of mind-boggling. So yeah, I don't know. I'm just really confused by the whole thing, and I don't understand why people how they can actually justify GDKP being so rare. Like, obviously, it benefits them. You know, like I understand why they want it from that perspective, but how they can actually argue that it is like better for the game than not having it in the game is absolutely insane. Whether we're talking the bots staying, the bots leaving, whether RMT's in the game, whether it's not. It's not better having GDKP in the game. I can absolutely assure you that. Just because you're personally having more fun and you're looking at the entire game through your perspective, that doesn't mean that it's better for the game overall. So, just my 2 cents. Curious what you guys think, and I will talk to you guys next time.